Left hand on the Bible. You affirm the testimony about to report in this trial shall be the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you. Take a seat in the witness stand. State your name again for the record. Spell your last name.
Ronnie Crosby, Crosby, C-R-O-S-B-Y.
Mr. Crosby, how are you?
I'm okay.
All right. Tell the court what your profession is and where you work.
I am an attorney that practicing law with the Parker Law Group.
And are you a former law partner of the defendant, Murdaugh?
I am.
You see him in the courtroom here?
I do.
And where is he sitting?
He is sitting between Mr. Griffin and Mr. Harpootlian at the defense table.
And again, this is an in-camera hearing, so you understand I'm not exploring everything that might, depending on the judge's ruling, be before a jury. But I do want to explore a particular meeting. Were you present for a meeting with in which the defendant spoke on June 10th, 2021?
I was.
And at this particular meeting, can you tell the court who all was present?
I'm not going to swear that I don't miss somebody because it was a fluid event. My recollection is it would have been late morning, midday that we gathered at Alec's brother John Marvin's place, which is not very far from Alameda that I've been talking about. And I know I'd been by to see Mr. Randolph that morning. There was going to be a meeting with law enforcement. They had given Alec a couple of days before they were meeting with him. And so we gathered there. I was present. Mark Ball was present. Lee Cope was present. John Marvin was present. At some point, I believe, I don't remember exactly when Buster arrived. Jim Griffin arrived at some point. And I want to say Corey Fleming was there. And there could have been others.
All right. While that group of people were assembled, did the defendant, and I don't want to get into the content, but the defendant make any statements about what had happened on the night of June 7th, 2021?
He did. We were there as friends. We had been with him starting the night of the murders every day. And we were there for support. And he went over the events of that afternoon or that evening, starting from the time he got home from work until the discovery of Paul and Maggie.
Where was this discussion taking place? Was it inside, outside?
We were in John's house there. I guess, I don't know if he calls it a house or a hunting lodge, but we were inside. But largely, I mean, there was some in and out of the house as well, but the majority, we were all sitting in a room together. And I was doing more listening than talking.
And were these the statements being made by the defendant? Were they being made quietly to his counsel, or were they being made openly to all the people in the room?
Well, the statements that I heard obviously were being, for me to hear them, I was not overhearing a conversation that was private between Mr. Griffin and Mr. Murdaugh. They did have some private conversations that the rest of us were not privy to, but so there's a mixture of that.
But there were private conversations that you don't know what they were because you weren't privy to those, correct?
Correct. And this was before, I believe, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division agents arrived at this location.
To be clear for the court, you did at other times, aside from this meeting or this discussion, have conversations with Alec about his activities the night of June 7th, 2021. They were outside of this. Is that correct?
Well, that's correct. I mean, obviously, we all were in shock, but also wanted to try to find out what all had went on, because we as we got past that night of June 7th and the morning of June 8th, we're all, trying to help find out what had happened and who may have been a potential suspect.
But in this investigation and in preparation, you were instructed to stay away from those until from that meeting, as opposed to the other ones that weren't in that meeting, out of an abundance of caution until we could get guidance from the court as to whether or not those in any way were protected. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, we had multiple conversations, as you might expect, all of us in a group, and it may be pieces and parts. But what you and I have discussed up until now have been outside of what was discussed on June 10th at John Marvin's house.
Okay. Your Honor, I don't believe I have anything further for purposes of this now. Anything further?
Yeah. Police court. Crosby, I believe Danny Henderson was also there.
Yeah, I told you I might miss one, but Danny was there. I don't think Danny was there at first, but he ultimately arrived.
And the meeting had been scheduled so that Alec and others, Brother Randy, for one, and John Marvin and Buster could be interviewed by SLED. Is that correct?
That's correct. The purpose was that SLED had scheduled a time, and I don't know who scheduled it with, and you're correct, Randy was there. And it was essentially going over the timeline of the evening of the 7th, because knowing that Alec was going to be interviewed, and I think Buster was, and maybe Randy and John Marvin over the course of that afternoon.
And you were not scheduled to be interviewed, correct?
I was not scheduled to be interviewed. And Jim, now that you speak of it, I do think that while Mr. Randolph did not come into the meeting, he and whoever brought him over did come by. Right. There's a two that I'd forgotten.
Yeah, and
then went back to Alameda,
where he died within hours of that, right?
He died as we were leaving, or right after we left this meeting with law enforcement. We were on our way back to, and Randy got a call.
Did you sit in any of the interviews conducted by SLED in the car?
I did not.
Okay. And Lee Cope was there, and he was not to be interviewed, right? That's not why he was present.
We were there as friends to provide support and listen.
And Mark Ball also was present.
Mark was, and I know Mark had some meetings with law enforcement about some concerns that he had, not about potential suspects and safety of.
And had you recall whether you and or Mark and Lee had given Alec some advice about whether he needed to have a lawyer at this interview?
I don't remember that specifically, but knowing that you were already involved, I mean, any of us would have thought it was a good idea.
Okay. What do you know whether Alec considered you and Mark and Lee, as well as Danny and Corey, as his counsel that day? I mean, do you know what he was thinking?
I don't know what he was thinking, but he never approached me as his lawyer, or throughout this, I never had the perception that I was representing him. Well,
did you, or in your presence, Mark Ball or Lee Cope, make it clear to Alec that, hey, we're not your lawyers here, and if you talk to Jim Griffin in my presence, then there goes the attorney-client privilege? Did you give him that warning?
Mr. Griffin, we're all lawyers. I don't, other than John and Buster that were there, I don't think anybody needed to say that, and it never crossed my mind that when we were sitting in a room and all of us were talking, that we were somehow representing Alec.
No, I understand that. And if, okay,
And nor would I ever do that because I don't practice in the area that you do.
but it's clear that Danny had an ongoing attorney-client relationship with Alec, is that right?
He did with regard to the boating accident. He was Alec's personal counsel in that.
And Danny had sat in the initial interview in the, that was conducted by SLED Agent Owen and Collin County Deputy Laura Rutland on the night of June the 7th. Are you aware of that?
Yes, I was aware of that.
Okay. And he was representing Alec during that interview, as far as you know.
I don't know. I saw, I mean, I know when Alec got in the car, we felt like one of us ought to sit in there with him, you know, for support because.
Well, can you say for certain that whenever you heard conversations from Alec about his recollection of what happened on the 7th, that there were any non-lawyers in the room? And I guess non-lawyers have been Buster and John Marvin. I mean, can you say for certain there were no non-lawyers in the room?
There were.
That you're referring to hearing conversations with Alec in the group about what happened on the evening, the events of the evening of June the 7th. And my question to you is when Alec was making these statements, let me make it clear, were they just lawyers in the room?
I can tell you that John and Buster were there for points of time. Can I tell you who was sitting and where they're, you know, whether John had walked out when I heard any specific thing? I can't tell you that. I couldn't catalog because I said it's a little bit fluid. People come and go, and you know, law enforcement arriving outside and people walking out to greet them. I mean, it wasn't like the SLED agents just showed up and it was, you know, some rigid thing where you walked out. I mean, there was small talk going on with the officers as well.
Sure. Okay. 1 second, Your Honor, please. That's all the questions I have, Your Honor.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. This issue.
This particular issue, no, I know that's a little bit different than the larger issue we've been dealing with, and I'll certainly be happy to argue that further if the court would like. As far as the larger issues, one of the things that we, in discussions with the defense, that we've stayed away from so far in testimony is the side of the road. And that might be the other piece of the puzzle a little bit that might need some in-camera testimony as I think all of this through. I know that we're butting up with the jury being here shortly, but
That can be done at a later time.
yes, sir.
Anything further on this issue regarding evidence of other crimes?
Aside from the side of the road, not at this time, no, Your Honor.
Do you have other witnesses